You're listening to Interchain FM, a podcast about all things blockchain interop, Web3, DeFi, and sometimes we talk about NFTs. If you're seeking alpha and Cosmos, look no further. I'm your host, Chango and Chain. Today, we're very excited to have the people behind Secret Network with me. We've got Tor and we've got Guy. We've got some Secret Santas up in here. We'll talk about the key differences behind Secret and other privacy protocols. And let's just get into it. Why don't you guys start with an intro about yourselves?
Guy, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Guy Zyskind. I'm the founder and CEO of Secret Labs, previously known as Enigma. I've been in the blockchain space for I don't know, almost a decade maybe. And I was always fascinated about blockchain and privacy. I think blockchain is the future of the internet, like so many other people in the space. But I felt that without solving the necessary problem of data privacy, we can't really move ahead and attract the mainstream, like cross the chasm and attract the mainstream people into the space. So that's mostly it.
Cool. I'm Tor. I'm the founder of Secret Foundation. I used to be head of growth at Secret Labs up until last year. And now Secret Foundation does a lot of growth-focused initiatives for the Secret ecosystem, a lot of community-focused work, expanding our Secret Agent program, just increasing visibility for the need for privacy solutions in Web3 for it to scale and reach that mainstream adoption. And I first met Guy way back in 2015 at MIT because he taught the first blockchain course offered at MIT, and I struggled to understand the first blockchain course taught at MIT. So I think both of us have come quite a long way since then, but it was a once in a lifetime kind of experience to be there right as this entire space was finally starting to evolve into more like what it is today, a real global movement.
And what was it that you were teaching, Guy, at MIT? Was it just some generic blockchain course like a 101? Or were you also tying in stuff about privacy?
Was mostly 101. I mean, this is back in 2015. Like we had Joe Lubin, like kind of introducing Ethereum, which was just like starting out. We did have like a one or two dedicated, more like advanced topics about privacy. But again, this is 6 years ago.
Right. And 6 years ago, you started the white paper called Enigma, right? And that ultimately turned into what we know as Secret Network. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, back then when I was a student, I mean, that was basically my research project. It was really about what Secret is today, which is, wait, am I okay? It was really about what Secret is today, which is, can we have a smart contract platform, but where the data in the smart contract is private? And the data mean the inputs to the contract, the state of the contract, which is like the contract database, and the outputs. Um, it was very different. I mean, the essential is the same, but it was very different because Ethereum was not really a thing. So we tried to kind of connect it to Bitcoin back then, which wasn't really a great idea. We used more cryptographic techniques, which weren't really scalable. So a lot of it like didn't turn into production, but I think the vision stayed the same.
Yeah. And at what point did you pivot from trying to connect to Bitcoin for this privacy network into one that is its own chain?
So actually, there were two steps. So in the white paper, it was connected to Bitcoin. Then when we were Enigma, the corporate entity, and it was still called the Enigma blockchain. At least that was the planned release. We were working on it as a layer 2 to Ethereum because by then Ethereum was big. We're talking like 2017, 2018. Um, but then around 2018, 2019, like we just realized that it doesn't work well. And that was even before Ethereum fees has skyrocket like so heavily. And at that point, actually, I was kind of refreshing my memory around consensus protocols, and I talked to one of the leading researchers in the consensus space called Itai. I forget his last name, um, and he was really excited about
The
Tendermint.
Itai Elitzer.
No, not Itai Elitzer. Itai Avraham, Itai Abraham, I guess. He's like a researcher in VMware. He has a lot of papers on consensus stuff like that. He's their like lead consensus person, and he kind of got me interested in Tendermint again, and on how just beyond Cosmos, like how big, like how cool it is that Tendermint actually improved the status quo in BFT consensus research. That the last time someone touched that was like 20 years before that in practical Byzantine fault tolerance protocol. And that was really interesting. And I dug deeper into Cosmos, and I was like, oh my God, this is a really cool thing. And it's not working well with Ethereum. We should probably just move to be our own chain and build on that technology. And that's kind of like that kind of shift happened in 2019, very early 2020 when we launched.
Sorry, and just for optimal listening experience, can you turn your notifications to silent, please? It's
That's
okay.
that's the life of a founder in the blockchain space, is that everything's a notification, everything is urgent. Out of sight, out of mind for the next hour, no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, going back to that, I think it's important that we give our listeners a crash course on the history of practical Byzantine fault tolerance and how that got folded into the blockchain space today with proof of stake. Can we talk about that? Because I like a lot of our listeners are pretty new, and they would like to at least understand that history a little bit more. So I
Sure.
guess, the history started with what DLS, DeWerk, Lynch, and Stockmeyer. So we go all the way back to there.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to go that far ahead. I mean, there were a lot of, like, I'd say, more like theoretical protocols before the 2000s. And then I think um, a lot of these, like the early 2000s, like in all of these things, it was mostly theoretical and more like feasibility results, not like anything practical. Then around 2000s came the practical Byzantine fault tolerance paper by, I think, Liskov, and can't remember who else, who was actually, I think, the first relatively scalable and actually something that you can practically build around Byzantine consensus protocols. And but then at the same time, I think the early 2000s up to like 2010 was really about like scaling cloud computing. So most protocols, I think, focused on inventions that are not as adversarial as blockchains, right? So like if you look at Google, like data centers and all that, like they need consensus protocols because they have highly available, highly distributed networks, but they control all the servers. They're not really concerned about like random people around the world running nodes and trying to crash the system. So they're using lesser models that are then easier to build protocols on, which are faster for sure, but they're not really practical for something like a blockchain. And then I think there was like a time where people were a bit less interested in the Byzantine case. But then came Bitcoin, as we all know, and Bitcoin solved one other thing. Bitcoin didn't just solve, I think, Byzantine fault tolerance in a sense, but it also solved Sybil resistance, which the PBFT protocol did not actually solve, right? The PBFT protocol said, okay, you know who the parties are, and now you can reach consensus, even if, like, some of them are gonna like do some really bad stuff. But if you have, but it didn't solve the problem of how do you prevent one entity from like creating 1,000 nodes and just taking over the system. So that Bitcoin did with incentives, and then Tendermint came, I think it was 2016. So Tendermint,
That's
which is the basis
2014.
of Cosmos, 14, I'm sorry, okay. So Tendermint, which is the basis of Cosmos, actually, as far as I understand, right, like it's been a while since I read the papers, but I think it reduced the protocol from in one round, I think from 3 to 2 rounds. Putting the technicality aside, what it really means is that it improved PBFT, as far as I understand, by about 1/3, which is quite a lot. I mean, this is, I think, the first major advancement in 20 years on the practical Byzantine fault tolerance kinds of consensus. So I think that's amazing. I think it's amazing that they were able to do it as a master thesis. Like it's pretty incredible. Just if people don't understand that, and then they combined it with proof of stake to solve the Sybil resistant issue, which is what is kind of like the basis of Cosmos, right? Cosmos is proof of stake plus Tendermint, and you get a consensus that is both Sybil resistant, like Bitcoin, but is both practical and Byzantine fault resistant as well.
Right. So just to sum that up in really simple terms, the last 40 years of practical Byzantine fault tolerance history has boiled down to what is now known as proof of stake. And it's divergent from Bitcoin's Sybil resistance mechanism, which is proof of work, in which you use hash power to prevent this one person spawning 100 different types, different nodes. And in proof of stake, you just say we're doing some sort of I guess thing that could lend itself to plutocracy, but it's more like more than sorry. Sorry, I just got a little technical difficulty. Yeah. So sorry about that. I just bought I bought a teleprompter, and it's like it's doing some weird things now. Okay. Anyway, aside from that, let's talk about Secret Network. Okay, so very, very high level. It's an Ethereum like generalized state machine in that people could launch smart contracts on top of it, but it's private by default. So what does that mean? Can you explain that in simple terms?
Guy, do you want me to try the simple terms and then you can explain at a more technical level how it's achieved?
Go for it, man.
I feel like I'm right back in that classroom, man. It's been incredible. I get it a little bit more now, which is nice. But yeah, it's very reminiscent of when we really did have to go back through the entire history to like justify even blockchain's existence. There was no adoption to point to of blockchain really outside of like a core group of nerds to be able to say this is an inevitable movement. So we had to see why it was an improvement on 40 years of research to understand that it could redefine how the next 40 years of the internet actually works. So Secret, yeah, the way that we describe Secret at a fundamental level is to say it's the first layer 1 blockchain that's got privacy by default for smart contracts. And we wanted to do that not just because we believe privacy is a fundamental right. We wanted to do it because there's actually huge usability advantages when you introduce privacy into smart contracts. So by being able to build new kinds of applications that can also protect data privacy simultaneously, you can do crazy new things in verticals that we've already seen adopted for blockchain, like DeFi, NFTs, et cetera. But you also enable completely new kinds of Web3 applications that would require privacy to function. And in addition, if you think where the space is going, that it's going to be more legitimized and more used, Web2 already has quite a few privacy protections baked into it at a legal level because we don't accept the exploitation of privacy in the Web2 world. Companies do get fined billions of dollars for failing their users, and they will continue to be fined. And in the Web3 world, up to this point, there's kind of been this assumption that by default, all of your data is public to everyone when you're interacting with the chain, when you're using a smart contract, and all of your history is public. There is no right to be forgotten. There is nothing that's known only to you. And that is, again, there's huge legal ramifications to this, but it's also just not good user experience, and it's a huge security risk. So obviously what we're doing has a number of like different security trade-offs and risks that get introduced by trying to provide privacy at the user level. But mainly what I would say the advantage of being the first private by default layer one with smart contract capabilities is the design space has just expanded 100x. And there's going to be a ton of experimentation from here as to what that's going to mean for end user experiences. But that alone is such a fundamental advancement that we're proud to pin the entire network and its growth behind that main differentiator. And we're delighted to be able to do it within the Cosmos universe because that also gets us massive interoperability advantages.
Right. And you guys did just upgrade to Supernova. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, at a high level, and then I think I should dive deeper into like actually what the network level changes that were made, because Supernova was not just us trying to implement IBC. It was like the main focus, but it was to add IBC, inter-blockchain communication protocol capabilities to our network, now allowing us to actually interoperate with other IBC-enabled chains like Cosmos Hub, but also chains like Terra, chains like Osmosis, all these other chains that are finding a ton of usage that are also based on the same fundamental underlying technologies. And that has massive growth potential, not just for Secret, but for the other chains, all of which can then benefit over time from leveraging Secret's privacy capabilities without needing to now, after the fact, try to figure out how to accomplish it all on chain for themselves. They can use Secret as a privacy hub within the Cosmos universe. That's always been part of our vision, not to just be a standalone universe. Like you can go back to Guy's papers from 2015. This was always meant to be something interoperable. This just now has become like an amazing path that we were able to follow where we achieve that interoperability, but don't lose our sovereignty, which is going to be important for where we want to go with applications on the network.
Meaningfully, what does this mean for users? So if I had hosted an NFT or launched one on, let's say, Osmosis, and then I sent it to Secret, do I get privacy features then? Or is it that I need to have a native app launched on Secret? And then if I moved out of Secret, does it preserve that privacy? How does that kind of work in a cross-chain world?
I think it's going to depend on the bridge, because we've looked at bridging not only to Cosmos networks, but also like how do we create these multi-chain NFT bridges to other NFT universes that have gotten substantial adoption like Ethereum and Solana. And they all have the same thing in common, which these are public by default smart contract networks. So you lose the privacy functionality once your NFTs are not based on Secret. But the way that the bridge could function is you could keep the asset, the original NFT asset issued on Secret, where it has private ownership by default, and you can have public or private metadata associated with that NFT. And if you were able to bridge it into another ecosystem, that could be a synthetic NFT that's created on the other side of that bridge. The original NFT could remain locked, so you still have that same ownership back on the original chain. That if you now moved the asset on the new chain, let's say you bridged to Ethereum and you sold it on Ethereum, you would then have a new owner on Ethereum. That owner could bridge it back to Secret, where they could access the private metadata and have the private ownership. And if that's the way that Secret starts interacting with NFT bridges with every network, you can quickly see how we might become a settlement layer and an issuance layer for NFTs that give you the most protections as an owner without losing any of the functionality that you would want those NFTs to have on other chains. But it definitely positions us to be an NFT hub in a multi-chain future. And a multi-chain future is the only future that we envision for the blockchain space, absolutely.
I would agree on that, just based on the trajectory of this space. So in terms of being a sort of specialized NFT hub, which is what Secret is appearing to turn into,
That's one of the things, not the only angle, but that's definitely one big angle.
was this intended, or did this kind of emerge organically?
Oh, go ahead, Guy.
No, do you want to start? Because like Tom
do.
was the NFT mastermind. Like, he's been pushing NFTs for like what, like a decade now? I don't know.
Oh, not okay. So to go back to my days at MIT briefly, I was not a blockchain researcher, but I did do my MBA independent project on digital rights management using blockchain. And anything that we would have had resembling an NFT standard at the time wouldn't have worked for the use cases that I was envisioning. Well, but for some of the things I was envisioning, it could have. Like royalties was something that I thought should be moved on chain, and there should be auditability. But after seeing guys' papers and coming around on the idea of needing to have native privacy solutions, you understand like why artists actually require this functionality, why payments require privacy, even in the royalties process. If you actually wanted real world integration, we just didn't want to build like a parallel universe. You need that additional programmability. But let's look at like Ethereum's narrative over the years. If you had asked what Ethereum was in 2015, and we did when Joe Lubin presented to the class, he's like, it's a world computer. So it was a world computer, and Consensus was going to build all the applications for it. And then by 2017, Ethereum was an ICO platform. And then by 2019, 2020, it was a DeFi platform. And then it became a NFT platform after the fact, once everybody saw, punks and OpenSea and all these things blowing up. But like these were all things that were being built years before that. It just wasn't the public narrative. It's easy to see now how like Secret Network could easily now have this narrative as an NFT hub, but fundamentally it was just, we wanted to build a differentiated, fundamental smart contract platform, differentiated on privacy. We knew thesis-driven and ethos-driven approach. Privacy was going to be essential for any of this to scale, no matter what was actually going to end up being adopted by end users. It turns out what end users want right now is ownership in the Web3 economy. And NFTs represent that ownership even more than fungible tokens represent that ownership. So if where we're going is being an NFT hub, it's because privacy is essential for securing actual ownership in this new iteration of the internet, where ownership is not just, it's in my wallet so I can use it, but ownership also means I choose who it's shared with, I choose who it's public to, I choose what I can see and someone can't. That's our definition of ownership. So it makes sense that we found a lot of strong product market fit there, but it could be that we wake up in a year or two as the DeFi part of Secret scales out and everything else, and the narrative has shifted again. We just want the narrative to be all based around what people are already using as collectors, creators, users. That's where people's perception of Secret is going to go. But fundamentally, all we cared about was introducing new functionality and expanding the design space. And with NFTs, because of how much massive public interest there is, that's what's filled the void for us primarily. But it's just the right place and right time to be introducing these kind of features because there's such strong demand for them.
Well, let's talk about the differences between the programmability of building an NFT on Secret versus on Ethereum. So, like, what are the sort of needs from artists and people who own like a trademark or something, right? Like, is there a key difference? You alluded to the fact that there is.
I mean, they are very similar. I don't think they are that different in terms of like from a developer's perspective or who's ever like publishing the NFTs. The main, I think, three differences that you have is, first and foremost, you have private metadata. So, an NFT is basically, it's a token, and then you have a public metadata where you connect, like put whatever data or link to a data, like, a JPEG or whatever that you want. And in the secret NFT case, you also have another field, which is private metadata. That is metadata that can only be seen by the owner, or the owner that can provide, like, using access control mechanism, access to other people to see and use, right? So it's more selective. But that's really the main difference. The second, I'd say, byproduct is that the wallet itself, so the identity of who's owning the NFT, the secret NFT, can also be hidden. So if you want to protect your own privacy as a collector, like, you can do that. And I think the third thing, which is not directly like in the secret NFT itself, but just like another property of Secret Network, which NFTs and games and metaverse applications find very useful, is the use of randomness. And I don't know if you've seen, but Paradigm like published a really interesting research paper, I guess, article a few months ago, where they showed how like bad pseudo randomness on like Ethereum, because Ethereum, it's very hard, it's basically impossible to get a proper randomness on Ethereum. Then people have like built bots that have like figured out like big drops, like the randomness, and then just basically took or minted all the precious pieces for themselves before users could get access to it. So that's something that is much more native and is much more possible because of the privacy properties of Secret. So again, any game, any NFT drop, PFP drop that uses randomness in some form of another, that's very beneficial for NFT developers.
Randomness is a really interesting topic that I think is like largely overlooked. So tell me about how Ethereum does randomness and how Secret does randomness. So as I understand it, you require different sources of entropy in order to achieve randomness, but then there's a lot of random number generators that are totally gameable, which as I understand it is the reason why Ethereum kind of approached this like VDF model. But then I don't really know where they went with that. So like where did they go with that, and how did people start abusing their randomness?
So the biggest problem with randomness, I mean, there are two things. First of all, blockchains are deterministic. So, if you have input data and you can kind of figure out what's going to happen in the future, if you have it like a priori, then you can kind of like fast forward, like predict the future, and then you can understand what the randomness is going to be. So it could be something that's random, that's fine, but if you can predict it ahead of everyone, then it's not really useful, right? Like if you can predict like what using if you can predict the randomness, then you can predict, like, for example, what would be the rare like NFTs in an NFT collection. So again, it's not very useful. So yes, they went through like other mechanisms like VDF and all that. Most of these are basically happening off chain today, and it's doable. It's tricky. I think where we come in, where the benefit is that you can do actually like proper on-chain randomness, and the reason is that because nodes in secret network don't see what they're computing on, what they're working on, so they can generate, like, for example, a random seed that no one knows, and because no one knows it, then no one can use it to predict like what's going to happen next. And in Ethereum, it gets like one of the things that Ethereum, like, one of the problems, one of the, I guess, the solutions that people are using that are even simpler than a VDF, is like the simplest way to get randomness is, okay, let's say you have 10 people, like 10 users that are going to participate in an NFT drop. Well, just ask each one of them to supply some randomness, then you combine them in a certain way, and you can guarantee that you get proper randomness. Is that correct? Well, it's almost correct, because the last user sees what everyone else provided, and then they can try different combinations and then control the output. Or the miners themselves can, sometimes, like if you're trying to use transactions or block hashes or that as means of randomness, then the miners themselves can extract value by trying different combinations and then adding that block. So long story short, it gets really complicated on a public chain. So you either use something off chain with some cryptographic mechanisms, or you use the benefit that the miners themselves, not the miners, the validators themselves on Secret, they don't know what the hidden randomness is, and you use that as a source of entropy.
Understood. So you kind of alluded to the fact that this off-chain source of randomness is what prevents even the validators or the node operators from seeing transactions before they come in or as they come in. So this does prevent front running, right? Can we talk about how Secret is actually pretty good at mitigating something like MEV?
Yeah, so that's, I'd say, slightly different. I mean, so basically, let's say you have, Uniswap, right? A Uniswap, basically, when the user comes in, they send a transaction saying, "Hey, I want to swap like this coin for that coin," and everything is public, so you know what the exchange rate is and all that. And now a miner, or even not a miner, like they see the mempool and they see what the trade is, and they can front run it, and they can give the same transaction with a higher fee, or try to manipulate it in other ways. I'm not an expert in MEV optimization techniques, but like the fact that the miners, and even not just miners, other participants can see the mempool and can see what's going on, means that they can come in and try to front run and get like their transactions to do stuff. In Secret, for example, in Secret Swap, which is kind of like a Uniswap on Secret Network, when a user sends a swap transaction to Secret Swap, their inputs are encrypted, right? They're only decrypted in the enclave, and no one can actually see what's going on there. So it's effectively that it's always encrypted. And for that reason, like if I'm a miner, if I'm sorry, a validator, or if I'm some outside user looking at the mempool, like I see nothing. Like I don't see anything of value, so I can't really front run.
Great. Yeah. So you did allude to the enclave, right? So let's talk about how Secret preserves privacy. So you use SGX, Secure Enclave. What does that mean for our more beginner listeners?
So an enclave is, I mean, if you've ever held or used a ledger device or a Trezor or any hardware wallet, they have an enclave, right? They have basically I mean, let's talk about hardware wallet. The hardware wallet is a device that holds your private key in a way that not even you can see the private key. And definitely the point is that if someone steals your hardware wallet, they can't extract the private key. But that device can still run a computation, which is take the private key as an input, as a private input, and then sign a transaction and only reveal the transaction on the output. So SGX or enclaves in general are the same thing, just a generalization. So now the private inputs can be anything, right? And then the code can be anything, and the output can be anything. So the point is, you can essentially, when you have an enclave, you have a machine where you can get encrypted data, private data in. You can run computations on that machine and produce results. But even the owner of the machine, even the owner of the system, like can't actually see the private data. And that's what we're using in Secret Network. All validators are essentially running validators with SGX capabilities, with enclave capabilities, which means that when they get encrypted transactions and when they execute smart contracts in the enclave, they cannot actually see what's going on, which is what we want.
Right. And just for our visual listeners, we've got Tor's cat tuning in as well. We have a special mascot saying hi.
Guy and I have long conversations about this because Guy thinks Newton, his dog, is the official mascot of Secret Network. And I tend to agree. But I have two cats that join me for 90% of my podcasts. So they're very frequent guests on most of the things that I appear on as well.
All I can say is, sorry, but all I can say is, I don't know, there's been a Secret Dogs NFT drop on our network last week. Newton, my dog, was one of them. And I've seen him put for sale for $2 million. So value-wise, Newton is like ranked higher.
That's because this cat is priceless and not for sale. Cover your ears, girl.
Yeah, somebody like people built like a dog Dogecoin and NFT to like Doquan's little pet as well. So will probably see a lot more of those permutations of your pets going on Secret. So you got so Guy, you mentioned that that validators need to use the secure enclave in order to validate, right? So is it would you say that it's kind of a permissioned system to get into secret network? It's like it's more closed off in that way, right? Because you have to have like a specific piece of hardware in order to be a validator, like not just the token.
I mean, I wouldn't call it permission. Like in Bitcoin and Ethereum today, like in Ethereum, I need at the very least like special GPUs. So does that make it permission? This it's pretty common. It's pretty common hardware. Unfortunately, I mean it's in almost every CPU today, as long as you're using Intel, which is like the biggest server solution anyway. The problem is that a lot of like motherboard vendors and people who write the firmware and the BIOS software, they don't turn that capability on, which is what actually limits the selection of hardware that you can get. But we have an amazing community, and we have people in our community who've actually built data centers and solutions to make it like more accessible. We have an infrastructure committee which is entirely community driven, and they like figure out, like they provide a list of like what works and what doesn't. So again, if you run a validator, I wouldn't say it's permissioned. It's not. It's slightly more difficult. I'd say like there is a slight higher barrier, but I haven't seen anyone who's like even a little bit motivated not able to do it.
Yeah, it's a very community-led process to do this type of hardware research for the network. I mean, as a Cosmos-based chain, we also have an on-chain community pool that gets filled from the block rewards over time. And so these community committees are funded on chain. So in that sense, like that's extremely permissionless as well. As long as the validators believe it's going to add value to the network, they vote in favor of funding these infrastructure committees. They use those funds to continue to do infrastructure research, to fund infrastructure expansions, to bring more nodes to the network, to support some of the other infrastructure around queries. It's something that I think as a decentralized ecosystem, we're all learning to do, because Secret is a very decentralized ecosystem. It's not one of those ecosystems where there's still one centralized entity that controls 80% of the coins in the network and just holds them in non-circulating supply, or is responsible for 90% of the coins staked or something like that. Like that's not the state of the Secret ecosystem. And we have tens of thousands of unique holders and tens of thousands of unique users of applications on the network. So we have to operate this way. We have to operate in a very permissionless network regardless. If the most challenging barrier to pass in our network is also the barrier that allows us to make our privacy properties, are like to make that a promise that we keep to the community, then I'm very comfortable with that trade-off. Like the developers who build on Secret want guarantees that what we're promising on privacy as a network is what they're going to actually experience, and users want that same promise as well. It makes sense to have a higher bar, at least on the validation level, but it's not permission in the sense that somebody's going to go have to sign off on your participation. It's a bar that we set because we make these guarantees to users and developers, and we don't want to break them. And as a result, we actually have an even higher bar for participation in the network in terms of the types of security checks that are made when you participate in the network. That bar is even higher, I would say, than you'd see in some other production level applications, because we don't want to allow any node that's potentially compromisable to join the network. So you can't join the network unless you're also patched against all of the potential vulnerabilities that have been at least disclosed and discovered. And we have to keep that bar high, again, just to protect users. And I think that so far it hasn't stopped network growth for sure. And it certainly hasn't stopped adoption. And we've kept our promise.
How is it enforced that somebody operating a validating node is sufficiently secure against exploits?
So SGX, any system using SGX can produce a remote attestation. It's basically a proof that's signed by the chip, and that signature basically shows that this is coming from an SGX enclave enabled device, and that it is running like the latest patch, like software, microcode, firmware, whatnot. And when there's updates, we update that in the network requirements as well. And it's actually a very cool protocol that we've built. So we're taking that proof, we're posting it on the blockchain, and then anyone can verify it. And like the network, as part of consensus, like it would not allow you to join, like if you're compromised, like if you don't pass those checks upon starting your validator for the first time.
So I want to backtrack to 2015. How did you have such a prescient view of the future such that you saw that privacy was going to be a big concern and a big problem that you needed to solve?
Oh, that's easy. I wanted to build an identity solution / a data marketplace on the blockchain. It sounded really, really cool because, I said, okay, I don't want big companies like owning our data and following us. I think people should control their own data, control their own identity. The blockchain is a decentralized system. Sounds like the perfect solution to create like a fair layer, an open layer to do that. But then I was like, okay, I was building a prototype actually on Ethereum Alpha. That was before Solidity existed, before all that. And I was like, wait, like I'm seeing everything public, like everything, and I'm uploading my data. I'm creating an identity solution, and everyone can see my data. Like that doesn't make any sense. And to me, that was like when it clicked, and I was like, okay, like this needs to be solved.
So in the future, do you envision one where people are going to be using secret network for decentralized identity?
Yeah, 100%. And I actually think NFTs are getting us closer to that vision.
NFTs on Secret Network are getting us closer to that vision. NFTs on Ethereum are getting us further from that vision.
Yeah, I agree. It's like on Ethereum, it feels more like, okay, now companies like Chainalysis, which I know the people there, they're good people. That's not the issue, but where there's business viability, people will exploit it. So to me, like people like harvesting our identity data through like public NFTs is very, very scary, as opposed to building reputation solutions and identity solutions based on secret NFTs. I think that makes a lot more sense.
What is currently happening with Chainalysis on NFTs on Ethereum?
Did I mention, Guy, that I ran into somebody at Chainalysis at the MIT conference, or not the MIT, the Miami conference? So we went to Decentral at the end of November, early December, right before our Basel, and we had a booth there, and there were a bunch of like Cosmos people and Terra people in attendance. So we had a great time. And I was standing in line at one of the food stands, and the dude behind me in line had the conference tag on as well. So we started talking. He saw my hat. We started talking about just like what Secret is doing, the NFTs, and it was shocking because like it was a very retail focused conference, so a lot of people weren't getting things right away. They were still asking very one-on-one questions, and he was just like, "What's a security model? Okay, that makes sense. What are the trade-offs when implementing the enclaves? Oh, that makes sense. What's the access control mechanism? How does this work if you issue contracts on the network that are fungible versus non-fungible?" He got it immediately. He's like, "Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I could see this getting a lot of traction." I said, "What do you do?" He says, "I'm a security researcher at Chainalysis. Please don't punch me." So that was a really fun conversation, and it let me know that what we were doing was really resonating with people who not only were going to be building solutions on Secret because they had our ethos, but also the people who are currently trapped in those other organizations where we might compromise some of these business models in the long run, but to the benefit of the users and developers who will choose to build in our ecosystem. I think there's a lot of amazing people working at these companies, which currently have amazing business models and can monetize and partner with governments. But I think Guy and I are on the same page where that's not the kind of world that we wanted to replicate from Web 2. We wanted something meaningfully different in Web 3. And it's just a question of, can we get the right people building our version of Web 3 and fewer people building the surveillance capitalism endgame?
Absolutely. And that resonates with me as well. Did this person allude to anything he was working on with state level actors like the government by any chance?
No. Surprisingly, he didn't admit to any of those relationships. I assume he has access to some of those relationships because he seemed to be quite experienced, but without compromising his secrets. I think it's safe to say that they're continuing to look to expand those relationships, not wind down those relationships. But just like you're seeing an exodus of people from Google into the Web3 space, I'm hoping we eventually see an exodus of people from Chainalysis into the private by default Web3 universe, so we can build things that'll be a little bit more resistant to, just the outcomes we don't want to see for this technology. Because like all technologies, it can be used well or misused.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a saying that goes that the shorter, well, for any new technology, we can have a short-term view of it, and we massively underestimate what it can turn into. And so at the very beginning, we tend to have a utopian vision of it, but in the long-term reality of a technology as it scales through the adoption curve, we really can't view it that far, like 20 years in advance, right? Like right now we have a utopian view of what blockchains can offer humans, but in 20 years it could very easily turn into this dystopian nightmare where like governments, for example, use it to just efficiently spy on its people. And so that's kind of the future that I definitely don't want to live in. Sounds like you guys don't want to live in. But at the same time, it's really optimistic and hopeful knowing that you guys, as well as some of the other people in the space, are building towards a future where we could have a parallel economy sort of emerge off of this tech that circumvents surveillance capitalism. That's important.
Yeah, we want to build those bridges though, right? Like we can't, I had this conversation on my podcast that I was hosting back in like 2018 with people when it was like a bear market and we thought it was going to be a bear market forever, effectively. We were like, the institutions never came, it's over. So is this just a weird parallel universe that'll never matter? And fundamentally, what we decided was we can't just be a parallel universe. There has to be a bridge. But I actually believe, and I think Guy would agree with this as well, because of his previous focus on like these data sharing use cases and marketplace use cases, privacy is a bridge to Web 2. There's a ton of people in Web 2 who care about privacy more than they care about blockchain or consensus mechanisms or NFTs. They just care about protecting it as a right. And there's plenty of cases in Web 2 where the main failing of the application was a lack of privacy. So these are applications where, like, there's not much incentive to move to different systems because they I don't know, how do you build the same thing as Facebook, in a Web3 universe with privacy? You can't have that same platform model. So I think there's a lot of people who would like to see Web3 move in this direction that is privacy first, coming from the Web2 world. It can be a bridge to say, companies already care about their privacy. Governments already care about their privacy. But what I also always say is like that doesn't mean they care about your privacy. They like their secrets. They don't necessarily want you to have secrets. In the Web3 world, in this empowered vision, we're saying everyone has the right to their secrets and they should have control over how their data is shared and used. And if that is something that resonates with you as a builder in Web2, because again, we're saying everybody has something valuable to them, especially businesses and enterprises, and especially governments. They should see the value of having that privacy protection extend to Web3. Otherwise, there's not really a great way to play by different rules in Web3. You really have to reveal everything by default. And the information advantaged actors, like Chainalysis, will be the big winners in this Web3 world. I don't even know that it'll be the governments in the end if they don't understand what they're looking at. I just think I wouldn't want to hand over control to just like a new set of overlords. I would like to democratize that control.
Absolutely. But governments can also wield companies like Chainalysis just because it is a centralized company. But yeah, you're right in that we do need a bridge, right? So I imagine that we could have these parallel universes operating, but then at some point there's going to be an inflection point when everyone's moved over. Because like the way I see it is DeFi is kind of this Trojan horse for decentralized finance that moves everyone off of TradFi and into this DeFi world, and people kind of don't want to move off because the cost associated with off ramping is so high, and then they're going to incur all these reporting liabilities, and people just don't want to do that. So like similarly, I think that as soon as we get social graphs onboarded into Web3 and we had the sort of network effect there, then people are going to move over. And hopefully we're at a point where user experience is comparable to Facebook's, and we could scale to that point to support, like such a huge number of people on the networks or network of networks. We're going to have a network of networks.
Yes. No, I agree with all that.
Right. Okay. So closing out, we've got a few minutes left. Let's talk about the differences between the other privacy protocols, right? Like people on this podcast, people listening to this podcast are going to wonder what the differences are. So there's secret network, and there's what people are most familiar with, which is Monero, Zcash, as privacy coins. And then there's Penumbra. So we're going to have Penumbra on next month, and that's really exciting. What are the sort of differences between your choices, like in terms of like novel cryptography used to do what you do?
So I think I'll take this. Um, so yeah, Zcash, Monero, all that. These are privacy coins. As a matter of fact, Secret as a native coin is not even a privacy coin. Like it's as traceable as Atom, Luna, Ethereum, Bitcoin, all that. What we care about is creating a data privacy layer for smart contracts, because smart contracts are where the interesting stuff happens. So that's from a technical perspective, or like more like an application perspective. We are using secure enclaves. Secure enclaves, I think they have two big benefits and one big drawback. The two big benefits are that they are extremely developer friendly. So if you're starting to use something like zero knowledge proofs, then you're limiting the types of applications that you can build, because usually you either have to write them in a very certain way, or you have to still trust someone to see the data. So I find it to be closer to the Web 2 model, to be honest, rather than Web 3. Um, so it limits the applications. B, it's more complicated for developers to build on, because they have to understand kind of like the model of writing like applications that use the framework of having a prover with secret data and then a verifier, which is a blockchain. It's usually combines off-chain with on-chain. It's a more complicated model. The other solutions that you have that are cryptographic are homomorphic encryption and MPC. So the benefit of what we're doing with enclaves is that we are like thousands of times faster and cheaper, which, based on every customer, user, developer research we've done and work we've done, is the thing that is more important at this point in time, right? I personally come from a cryptographic background. The original Enigma white paper was purely cryptographic. It was MPC, and I've said this before and I said this again. When the time comes to adopt like more cryptographic alternatives, or let's say not to replace enclaves, but to augment them and to add on top of them, we'll be the first ones to do them, and we will carefully watching the space. But right now, I feel that the economics don't make sense. I feel that if you're trying to use these technologies, you're gonna get a subpar user and developer experience, and to us, that's the most important part.
Understood. Okay. Going back to higher level application topic, you guys onboarded Quentin Tarantino, right? And let's talk about that. That was pretty big news when that came out.
It's big news now too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna be big news as well when it sells, right? When it's out.
Well, what can you tell us about it?
For those who aren't familiar, and just like to explain, Quentin Tarantino, um, we met. He came to our office. We had a few meetings actually, and we brainstormed about NFTs. He he was he was really excited about NFTs, and he's really excited about NFTs, but he was equally skeptical. He's a super smart person. He got it like immediately, and he was like, I understand the value of NFTs when it comes to data ownership, digital ownership, but he was very skeptical about the right click save thing, right? Like if I publish something that you know, is not unique, is not exclusive, everyone like can see it, can get it before they even like purchase it. Like he was struggling to see the value in that. I think he's come a long way and he's like closer to us than he used to be. But he raised like fair points that a lot of people raise and a lot of artists raise. And when we brainstorm after I think like 3 beers or something, he was basically saying, look, I want to give something that is extremely exclusive, that is extremely valuable. Like that's what I care about. If we use this new medium to publish, then I want to do it with something that actually makes a difference. And then he came up with the idea saying, "Look, I have the original Pulp Fiction screenplay. I always write my screenplays, like old school, like with a pen and paper. I have my personal comments, like all my ideas there. No one sees it. Sorry, no, and when it came to Pulp Fiction, no one saw that the original screenplay except himself for 25 years. It's been in his personal library and sat there, and only he has looked at it. And he was like, okay, I want to take that and create an NFT from that screenplay because that's unique content. And with secret NFTs, he really saw it like the click where, with secret NFTs, you can put it up for sale, right? And then the owner basically gets like first look at this new content that was never revealed before. And then the owner can decide like, do I make it public? Do I resell it? Do I keep it to myself? Um, um, and I guess that's how the connection was made, and that's kind of what he saw value in. We think that's really cool, and now it's expected to happen next month. We haven't dropped the final date, so stay tuned, I guess. But yeah, Tori's saying don't leak alpha, but it's expected to happen in January, where those NFTs, secret NFTs, which are seven NFTs. Each one of them is going to be one of one, a chapter from this original screenplay alongside newly recorded commentary by Quentin. That's what's coming up for sale.
That's a collector's item for sure. So how did you pull it off? Like how did you know him in the first place?
We actually have a good friend who is also a good friend of Quentin, like a mutual friend. And he just said, look, he told Quentin, you should meet these guys. You should talk to them. Like he's heard about NFTs. A lot of people came to him asking him like to do NFTs, but that mutual friend made the connection, and I think just the relationship clicked, and the idea behind secret NFTs intrigued him, and that was the deal.
Yeah, I think what we've found over the last month since that was announced too is that people are actually pulled in more by the functionality than even they were by the name. Like they understood the use case immediately because what Quentin was deciding to do was different from what anybody had been able to do in other layer one ecosystems. And it helped to have his credibility behind it, somebody who could do anything with an NFT because he had so many opportunities, chose to do this. Why? But it would be one thing if we were just leaning on, it's Quentin Tarantino, so of course everybody's going to do this. Instead, it seems to be, well, how did he use it? Like, especially Web3 creators, they don't care who it is. They want to know what they did. And when they hear the use case and this like content monetization, exclusive drop kind of use case, they're like, that's so much better. This is such a better model for the creator. And when the collectors hear it, they say, that's going to actually hold its value, because the value of the NFT is what's inside the briefcase, what's inside the NFT. And then I think that people are starting to understand this is the sustainable model for NFTs that should have existed in the first place. But just like if you went back to 2017 and tried to build DeFi on Ethereum, it basically was doomed to fall apart until fundamental improvements were made. We've made a fundamental improvement at layer one. Now we see these new use cases. NFTs are not a solved space. And if people like Quentin Tarantino will be the thought leaders from the old world who will also be the leaders in the new world, I'm fine with that, because I have so much respect for a creator like that who forged his own path in Hollywood and had to go around like anything that you would have thought of as a traditional Hollywood career. People like that do deserve to be able to forge a path in the Web3 world, not, even whether they're crypto native or not. We need those kind of brilliant innovators looking at Web3 and seeing what we see when we look at it, a place that is just a giant sandbox, but also something that's going to work so much better for the creators and the collectors who are going to power it to its next phase of adoption.
Absolutely. And bringing celebrities on is really, really powerful, because we like crypto as an industry didn't really obtain relevancy to the mainstream until NFTs kind of took off. Because before, when we just had Bitcoin or fungible coins, like ETH, we only had store of value, we had medium of exchange, we had unit of account, but we didn't really have this more like culturally relevant thing that's tied to wealth or signaling wealth.
What do you mean? We had Dogecoin.
Yes, we did have Dogecoin. That's true. But somebody couldn't show off their Dogecoin, right? It wasn't like the sort of signaling mechanism, the way that people would use, high-end cars for, or, like luxury jewelry items, right? Like Chanel or whatever. There wasn't this sort of fourth feature of a currency the way that an NFT offers. So this was kind of the inflection. It was kind of the innovation that caused crypto to inflect over to the mainstream.
Which I'm happy about it, but I'm also not. I don't have to be happy about every celebrity that does it. I'm happy that we found something that's touching people in that way. Like any technology, it can be misused. So I just hope that at least what we're building in our universe is going to attract more of the innovators, fewer of the cash grabbers.
True.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, just like even beyond like Quentin, which is, it's amazing to work with him, but the plethora of like creators that I've had the pleasure of talking to in the past like couple of months on very different fields of creation, like from sports to entertainment to movies to all that. Yeah, I'm not saying names. It's fine. It's fine. But it's just amazing the types of ideas that people are coming up with on what they can do with NFTs. Like we are just barely scratching the surface. And like I like the amount of creativity. Like someone who I really appreciate is a pretty big name told me, look, NFTs are all about content, and with content we can just like do everything.
Absolutely. Speaking of NFTs, let's talk about the ones that are currently launched on Secret. So there's Anon's NFT, you have MetaRat's NFT, which is a play on the Osmosis design IP. And there's Secret Dogs, Secret Punks, Redacted Club, and Mystic Skulls, right? Did I get everything?
You named some of the ones that have launched, but we had a blog post out that had like 22 projects that we're launching over the next 3 weeks. Wow. So, and they keep doing more because I can't even keep track anymore. Like it's the experimentation is blowing up. But what's nice about all the ones that you've mentioned is they all take advantage of the private metadata in some way to do something really cool. And each one of them does something different. That's what we want to see. You can launch cool art on Secret and it'll be great and you'll build a community around it just like you can on ETH or Cosmos or Solana or whatever. But I think that the better use you can make of those interesting and novel tech features, the more success you're going to have in our ecosystem. We're still an ecosystem for innovators more so.
Okay, final question. How does IBC afford Secret what it wants to achieve?
Easy. The vision was always we should complement, like we should provide privacy for Web3. Always has been the vision, even before people called Web3 Web3, ever since the Enigma white paper. And the only way to do that is an interoperable like space. Like we don't we I mean we want as many users and people using layer one Secret, but at the end of the day, if Secret is just a pillar for other chains to leverage privacy properties that they so much need for, then we've succeeded. IBC helps us do it without us actually having to worry about building these interoperable bridges.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Guy and Tor, for coming on to Interchain FM. Where can people find you?
In the metaverse, I think we can both drop our Twitters. We'll start with the Secret Network Twitter. So just follow Secret Network on Twitter. If you want to join our biggest community channel, that's the Discord. That's chat.scrt.network. And I'm just Bair on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm just Guy ZYS, Guy Zis on Twitter.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you to the listeners for tuning into Interchain FM. We are doing this every single Thursday of the week, except next Thursday in observation of the holidays. So we'll be back come the first week of the new year. And when you speak of the devil, he may come. So the first week of the new year is Henry de Valence of Penumbra. So we'll talk about that. January seems to be a big one for privacy-themed interviews. So stay tuned for that. Thank y'all and happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye.